The Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of evergreen and mulled wine. Outside, snow blanketed Chicago's skyline, catching the glow of skyscrapers in a dance of winter light. Inside, Pinnacle Solutions' annual Christmas party was in full swing, a spectacle of corporate excess. The jazz band's upbeat tempo mingled with the clink of champagne flutes and the laughter of over 100 employees, clients, and board members. I stood by the dessert table, a glass of sparkling water in hand, feeling like an outsider in my clearance rack navy suit. At 27, I was a junior data analyst at Pinnacle, a cog in a machine that churned out tech solutions for Fortune 500 clients. My paycheck barely covered my student loans and the rent on my cramped studio apartment, but tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was about Lila Harper, my girlfriend, the woman who'd made my world feel bigger than my circumstances. Lila was across the room, a vision in an emerald dress that hugged her curves like it was made for her. Her auburn hair cascaded in waves, catching the light as she laughed with a group of senior managers. Her presence was magnetic, drawing eyes and smiles effortlessly. We'd been dating for 3 months, a whirlwind that started with a late-night project session in the office. She'd asked for help with a spreadsheet, her green eyes sparkling with mischief, and by the end of the night, we were sharing coffee and stories about our dreams. She wanted to travel the world. I wanted to build something lasting. Maybe a tech startup that helped people like me, kids from nothing who needed a break. Our first kiss, under the glow of a street lamp after a rainy evening, felt like the start of something real. We'd kept our relationship quiet to avoid office gossip, but I was ready to stop hiding. Tonight, I planned to tell her I loved her, spurred by the holiday spirit and a nudge from my coworker, Jake. "Man, you're whipped," Jake had said earlier, tossing me a soda from the bar. His grin was infectious, his tie already loosened. "Lila's got you wrapped around her finger. Just say the L word already. She's crazy about you." I smirked, but my stomach churned with nerves. "It's not that simple. What if she's not ready?" Jake rolled his eyes. "You're overthinking it, Ethan. You've got that nerdy charm. Don't blow it by chickening out." He was right, but the ballroom's grandeur made me feel small. The crowd was a sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns, a who's who of Pinnacle's corporate elite. Richard Vaughn, our CEO, held court near the stage, his booming laugh cutting through the music. Mid-40s, with a chiseled jaw and a Rolex that screamed success, Richard was the architect of Pinnacle's rise from a startup to a regional powerhouse. He was also married, with 2 kids and a wife, Diane, who was the picture of suburban perfection. She'd shown up at last year's party, all smiles and elegance, but tonight, she was nowhere in sight. I figured she was home with the kids, leaving Richard to play the charming host. I scanned the crowd for Lila, my heart racing at the thought of our future. We'd spent last weekend curled up in my apartment, binge-watching horror movies and eating takeout. She'd laughed at my terrible puns, her head on my shoulder, and I'd felt like the luckiest guy alive. But as my eyes found her, something stopped me cold. Richard was standing too close, his hand brushing her arm as he leaned in to whisper something. Lila laughed, her cheeks flushing, and she playfully swatted his shoulder. My chest tightened. It wasn't just friendly banter, there was an intimacy in their body language that felt like a punch to the gut. I told myself I was imagining things. Richard was her boss, and Lila was up for a promotion in the marketing department. They'd been working closely on a big campaign, staying late at the office while I crunched numbers in my cubicle. She'd told me it was just work, that Richard valued her ideas. But the way his hand lingered, the way she leaned into him, it didn't feel like work. It felt personal. I took a deep breath, trying to shake it off. Lila loved me. She'd said it a week ago, her voice soft as we lay in bed, the city lights filtering through my window. "I'm falling for you, Ethan," she'd whispered, and I'd believed her. But as the band shifted to a slower, sultry tune, Richard guided Lila to a quieter corner near the bar, partially obscured by a towering Christmas tree decked in gold ornaments. They were still visible to anyone paying attention, But the crowd was distracted by the dance floor and a dessert auction raising funds for charity. I watched, my feet rooted to the floor, as Richard cupped Lila's face and kissed her, deeply, passionately, like they'd done this before. And Lila kissed him back, her hands on his chest, her body pressed against his. My glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the marble floor with a crash that echoed in my ears. A few heads turned. Karen from HR, a couple of clients, but I barely noticed. My vision tunneled, the world shrinking to that corner where my girlfriend, the woman I loved, was betraying me with our married CEO. Pain and rage surged through me, a tidal wave that drowned out reason. I should have walked away. I should have taken a moment to breathe, to process the betrayal. But my legs moved before my brain caught up, carrying me toward them through the crowd. Whispers followed me, eyes tracking my path. Jake grabbed my arm as I passed, his voice urgent. "Ethan, don't do this. You'll tank your career." "She's my girlfriend, Jake," I said, my voice hoarse. "I can't let this slide." I shook him off and closed the distance, my pulse roaring like a freight train. Richard and Lila broke apart as I approached, their faces a mix of guilt and defiance. Lila's lips were flushed, her eyes wide with panic, like a deer caught in headlights. Richard's jaw tightened, his gaze cold and calculating, like a predator sizing up prey. "Ethan," Lila stammered, her voice trembling. It's not what you think. Not what I think," I said, my voice louder than I intended. The jazz band faltered, a saxophone note trailing off. Heads turned, the crowd sensing drama. "I saw you kissing him, Lila. My girlfriend, kissing a married man in front of the entire company." Gasps rippled through the room, a wave of shock that silenced the chatter. Richard forced a smile, the one he used to charm boardrooms and clients. "Careful, Ethan," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're making a fool of yourself. Let's take this somewhere private." "Private?" I laughed, the sound bitter and raw, echoing in the sudden quiet. "Like your little corner over there? You're cheating on your wife with my girlfriend, Richard? You think you can just brush this off?" The room was a tomb, the music gone, every eye on us. Dozens of witnesses, coworkers, clients, board members, stood frozen, their drinks forgotten. Lila stepped forward, her hands shaking, her voice pleading. "Ethan, please. You're embarrassing yourself. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen." "A mistake?" I snapped, my voice cracking with hurt. "You were all over him. How long has this been going on, Lila? How long have you been lying to me? To us?" Richard moved between us, his smile vanishing, replaced by a sneer. "You're out of your depth, kid," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're a nobody. A low-level analyst with a community college degree and nothing to your name. You think you can take me on? I'll have you fired by Monday." The threat hit like a punch, but I was too angry to back down. "Go ahead," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "Fire me. But everyone here saw you. You can't hide this, Richard, not this time." Lila's voice cut through, sharp and venomous, slicing deeper than Richard's threat. "You're pathetic, Ethan," she said, her eyes glittering with disdain. "You're just a broke nobody who thought he could keep me. You'll never be anything compared to Richard. I deserve better than you." Her words were a dagger, twisting into every insecurity I'd shared with her in our quiet moments. I'd told her about my struggles, my student loans, my tiny apartment, my fears of being stuck forever. She'd listened, held my hand, promised we'd build a future together. Now she was using my vulnerabilities to tear me apart in front of everyone. The crowd murmured, some whispering, others openly staring, their faces as a mix of shock and morbid fascination. Jake appeared at my side, his hand on my arm. "Ethan, let's go. This is a losing battle." But before I could respond, a new voice broke through, calm and commanding, cutting through the tension like a blade. "What's happening here?" The crowd parted as Margaret Caldwell, my aunt, stepped forward. She was in her late 50s, elegant in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight, her presence radiating an authority that silenced the room. Most at Pinnacle knew her as a silent board member, a wealthy investor who rarely attended company events. What they didn't know was that she was my father's sister, my only family after my parents died in a car accident when I was 16. I'd grown up under her care, but I'd insisted on keeping our connection secret, determined to earn my place at Pinnacle without her influence. She'd respected my wishes, staying in the background, but tonight her eyes were sharp, taking in the scene with a clarity that made my stomach twist. "Ethan?" Margaret's gaze flicked from me to Richard to Lila, her expression unreadable. "Explain." Richard recovered quickly, his charm snapping back into place like a mask. "It's just a misunderstanding, Margaret," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Ethan's had a bit too much to drink and got emotional. We're handling it." "That's a lie," I said, my voice steadier now, though my heart still pounded. I caught Richard kissing Lila. He's married, and she's my girlfriend. Now they're threatening to fire me for calling them out. Margaret's gaze hardened, landing on Richard like a spotlight. "Is this true?" Lila jumped in, her voice shrill and desperate. "He's lying. Ethan's obsessed with me. He's blowing this out of proportion because he's jealous." Margaret raised a hand, silencing her with a single gesture. "I don't tolerate baseless accusations, but I also don't tolerate misconduct." She turned to the crowd, her voice carrying with quiet authority. "Did anyone else see what Ethan described?" A murmur ran through the room, the tension palpable. Karen from HR stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. I saw Richard and Lila near the bar. They were very close. It looked inappropriate." A client I recognized from a recent pitch, a middle-aged man in a tuxedo, cleared his throat. "I saw it too. They were kissing, no question. It wasn't just a friendly moment." Richard's face paled, his charm faltering, but he tried to laugh it off. "This is absurd. It was a fleeting moment, exaggerated by a disgruntled employee with a personal vendetta." Margaret's eyes narrowed, her voice cold as steel. "A fleeting moment? With an employee? In front of clients? You're the CEO, Richard. Your actions reflect on this company, and you've just embarrassed us all." She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. "Ethan, you're certain of what you saw?" I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I'm certain. I wish I wasn't." Margaret sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly, as if the weight of the situation pressed on her. "This party is over," she said, addressing the room. "We'll address this internally. Richard, Lila, my office, Monday morning. Ethan, you're coming too." The crowd dispersed, their whispers buzzing like a swarm of bees. Jake dragged me toward the coat check, muttering under his breath. "You just started a war, man. I hope you know what you're doing." Lila shot me a venomous glare as she stormed off, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Richard's stare was colder, promise of retribution that sent a chill down my spine. My heart ached, not just from the public humiliation but from Lila's betrayal. I'd loved her, trusted her, built dreams around her. Now those dreams were ashes. As I grabbed my coat, Margaret pulled me aside, her voice low. "You did the right thing, Ethan," she said, her eyes searching mine. "But you've made powerful enemies. Be careful." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The night had started with love and hope. Now, it was a nightmare, and I wasn't sure I'd wake up. The weekend was a blur of sleepless nights and endless replays of that kiss. My tiny apartment, usually a refuge, felt like a cage. I ignored Lila's calls, her voicemails a mix of apologies and excuses that I couldn't bear to hear. Jake texted me updates, warning me about the office gossip. Richard was spinning the story, painting me as a jealous liar who'd overreacted. Lila claimed I'd been controlling, suffocating her with my insecurities. The rumors stung, but the truth hurt worse. I'd loved her, and she'd thrown it away for a married man with power and money. Monday morning, I walked into Margaret's office like a man facing a firing squad. The sleek, modern space, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and polished mahogany desk, felt like a courtroom. Richard and Lila were already there, exuding confidence that made my stomach churn. Richard wore a tailored suit, his smirk intact, as if he'd already won. Lila's expression was a carefully crafted mix of defiance and victimhood, her eyes red like she'd been crying. Margaret sat behind her desk, her face unreadable, a stack of papers neatly arranged in front of her. "Let's cut to the chase," Margaret said, her voice calm but firm. Multiple witnesses, including clients, confirmed Ethan's account of what happened at the party. Richard, your behavior was a gross breach of trust and professionalism. Lila, your involvement raises serious questions about your judgment. This isn't just a personal matter, it's a liability for Pinnacle Solutions. Richard leaned forward, his voice smooth as ever. Margaret, let's be reasonable. This is being blown out of proportion. Ethan's accusations are personal. He's upset because Lila chose me over him and he's lashing out. That's not true, I said, my fists clenched under the table. I saw you kissing my girlfriend. You're married, Richard, with kids. You can't gaslight your way out of this. Lila scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. You're delusional, Ethan. You've been clingy and insecure since we started dating. You're just mad because I'm moving up and you're stuck in your dead-end job. Her words were a fresh wound, echoing her attack at the party. I'd shared my fears with her, my worry that I'd never escape my cubicle, that I wasn't enough. She'd promised to stand by me, to build a future together. Now she was using my vulnerabilities to tear me down. I opened my mouth to respond, but Margaret cut in, her voice sharp. Enough, she said, her eyes flicking between Richard and Lila. I've heard from impartial witnesses, including clients who have no reason to lie. Their accounts corroborate Ethan's. Richard, you're suspended pending a full investigation by HR. Lila, you're on probation. One more misstep, and you're out. Richard's composure cracked, his face reddening. You can't do this, Margaret. I built this company from the ground up. I'm the reason Pinnacle is what it is. And I'm a majority shareholder, Margaret said, her voice cold as ice. You don't dictate terms, Richard, not anymore. Lila turned to me, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and desperation. You're gonna pay for this, Ethan. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Her words hit like a slap, the same cruel taunt she'd hurled at the party. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with tension. I felt the weight of every eye on me, Richard's smirk, Lila's glare, Margaret's unreadable stare. I wanted to shrink away, to disappear, but something inside me held firm. I wasn't the one who'd betrayed anyone. Before I could respond, Margaret stood, her presence commanding the room. Lila, you're treading on very thin ice, she said, her voice like steel, and Ethan is far from nothing. Richard snorted, his smirk returning. Come on, Margaret. He's a junior analyst with a community college degree and a studio apartment. He's nobody. Let's not pretend otherwise. Margaret's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. You assume too much, Richard. It's time for some clarity. She turned to me, her expression softening, a warmth in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Ethan, I've kept this quiet at your request, but you need to know the truth. And so do they. I frowned, my heart pounding. What truth? Margaret took a deep breath, her hands resting on the desk. When your parents passed, they didn't just leave you in my care. They left you a trust fund, a substantial one, tied to the Caldwell family estate. I've been managing it until you turn 30, as per their wishes. You're set to inherit over $50 million in assets, including a significant stake in Pinnacle Solutions. The room went silent, the air sucked out like a vacuum. My jaw dropped, my mind reeling. $50 million? I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, the words echoing in my head. Richard's smirk vanished, his face paling to a sickly gray. Lila's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I stared at Margaret, my voice barely a whisper. Why? Why didn't you tell me? You wanted to make your own way, Margaret said, her voice gentle but firm. You insisted on earning your place without the Caldwell name, without any help. I respected that. You've worked hard, Ethan, harder than most, but you're not a nobody. You never were. Richard sputtered, his voice rising. This is insane. You're saying he's been sitting on millions while slaving away as a glorified intern? Margaret's eyes gleamed, a hint of satisfaction in her gaze. He's been proving his worth, Richard, something you could learn from, given your recent choices. Lila's voice was small, trembling, barely audible. Ethan, I didn't know, I didn't mean. Save it, I cut her off, my voice cold as ice. You made your choice, Lila. You chose him over me, and you threw it in my face. We're done. Margaret continued, her voice steady. Ethan, with your inheritance, you'll have a seat on the board if you choose to take it. Richard, your suspension is effective immediately. HR will determine your future with Pinnacle, but I wouldn't be optimistic. Lila, you're on notice. One more incident, and you're out. Richard stormed out, his curses echoing down the hall. Lila lingered, her eyes pleading, but I turned away, my heart a lead weight in my chest. She'd broken me, and no apology could fix that. Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me. We'll talk later, she said softly. Go home, Ethan. You've been through enough. I nodded, my mind a whirlwind, and left the office. The weight of the truth pressing down on me. The weeks that followed were a storm of change. The HR investigation confirmed Richard's affair, backed by witness statements and even security footage from the hotel. He was quietly let go, his reputation in tatters, his name erased from Pinnacle's glossy brochures. Lila was transferred to a smaller branch in Ohio. Her career stalled, her ambition curbed by the scandal. The office gossip was relentless, a mix of awe at my confrontation and speculation about my newfound wealth. I became a ghost in the hallways, avoiding the curious stares and whispered questions. I took a leave of absence, needing space to process everything. Lila's betrayal, Margaret's revelation, the inheritance that turned my world upside down. My apartment, with its peeling paint and secondhand furniture, felt both foreign and comforting. I sat on my worn couch, staring at the city lights, trying to make sense of who I was. I'd spent years defining myself by my struggle, by my determination to rise above my circumstances. Now I was a millionaire, a Caldwell, with power I'd never wanted. Jake dragged me out for beers one night, his grin as wide as ever. You're a freaking legend, man, he said, clinking his bottle against mine. You took down the big bad CEO and turned out to be a secret billionaire. This is straight out of a movie. It doesn't feel like a win, I admitted, staring into my drink. I loved her, Jake. I thought she loved me. He nodded, his usual humor fading. She didn't deserve you, Ethan. She showed her true colors. You did the right thing, calling them out. Not many would have had the guts. His words helped, but the ache lingered. Margaret met with me weekly, guiding me through the trust fund's complexities. The numbers were staggering. Stocks, real estate, a stake in Pinnacle that gave me real influence. She showed me the legal documents, my parents' signatures on pages that secured my future before I was old enough to understand. They'd been wealthy, not ostentatiously so, but enough to ensure I'd never want for anything. Margaret had honored their wish to let me find my own path, but now that path was wide open. I didn't want to be a corporate shark like Richard, lording power over others. Instead, I invested in a startup focused on affordable tech education, a cause I'd always cared about. I wanted to help kids like me, those with big dreams and empty pockets, get a shot at something better. I kept my apartment, my cheap suits, my beat-up Honda. The money didn't change who I was at my core. It just gave me freedom to live on my terms. Lila tried to reach out, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to desperate pleas for forgiveness. I made a mistake, Ethan, she said in one. I was stupid. I didn't know who you were. Please, can we talk? I deleted them all. The woman I'd loved was a mirage, her true self revealed in that corner by the Christmas tree. She'd chosen power over love, ambition over loyalty. I deserved better. The next Christmas, Pinnacle's party was a quieter affair, held in a smaller venue with a new CEO, a no-nonsense woman who prioritized ethics over charisma. I attended as a board member, not an employee, my presence drawing curious glances. My suit was still off the rack, but I carried myself differently, a quiet confidence born of knowing my worth. Jake was there, teasing me about being the secret tycoon, his arm around a new girlfriend who laughed at his terrible jokes. The snow fell outside, blanketing the city in silence. The jazz band played a soft melody, and I stood by the window, watching the flakes dance. The pain of Lila's betrayal had faded, not gone but manageable, like a scar that no longer ached. I'd lost love, but I'd gained something else. A sense of self, a purpose, a future I could shape. Merry Christmas, Ethan, Margaret said, appearing beside me with a glass of wine. Her smile was warm, proud. You've come a long way. I nodded, clinking my glass against hers. Thanks to you. She shook her head. No, Ethan. Thanks to you, you stood up when it mattered. That's who you are. I smiled, the weight of the past year lifting slightly. The music swelled, the crowd laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Lila was my past, my future was mine to build.